Hey Antonio, how's it going?
Hey, good, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. I see we have people starting to join. Let's maybe give it a couple minutes,
Sure.
for people to join in, settle in, and we can begin. See, we have people kind of trickling in already. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm based in Paris, so apologize already if you hear some little kids yelling with its bath times.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I guess we can begin. We have people starting to trickle in. I'll maybe start with a quick introduction about Antonio. Antonio, started his career back in the day with GE. He was there for a few years across various roles. The last one of which was, he was leading FP&A. Then he switched to Microsoft, where he was a leader in the finance team, and then he moved to Google, for a few years, where he was leading finance in the cloud consulting business. And yeah, now he's at PVH, which is a fashion giant, and he's VP of finance over there. And today we're gonna talk about a very topical topic, which is about resetting your financial strategy as we kind of progress within 2025. It's a topic that some of you wrote to us about and you want to chat about. So we'll have Antonio share his insights. Antonio, before I dive in and dive into Q&A, anything you want to add about either yourself or the topic in itself?
No, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, first and foremost. And I think that this topic is, I wanted to be part of it because I think it is one of the topics that I've always been wondering throughout my career. How do you approach it, whether you're in as an entry level professional or you're more in a senior role? I think
Yeah,
this is a topic that everybody's top of mind.
awesome. Let's dive right in. So, Antonio, I mean, before we actually talk about resetting financial strategy, you want to take some time to just talk about what, is financial strategy in your opinion?
Yeah, I think I would define finance strategy as what is the outcome that you want to have it for your business
Mm-hmm.
in a long-term horizon, right? At least a 3-year vision.
Okay.
And that for me would be like, what is the outcome that you want to be at in the next, 3, 4, 5 years? And then from there, you build everything backwards, right? How do you get there from a revenue perspective, and what cost structure do you need to actually accomplish that? And keeping in mind, obviously, all the market
Mm-hmm.
dynamics around your industry. But I would say, in a nutshell, that's it.
Fair enough. So, I mean, maybe what you're saying is to achieve the medium to long term outcome that you want, like what are the kind of levers that you can play with to achieve that outcome is the financial strategy. On that note, maybe I'll like to start a poll with the audience. I'd like to understand from people themselves on the webinar, what is your top priority as you think about your financial strategy or the resetting of it for the year 2025? I'll have the team kind of just set up the poll. We'll give the people a few minutes to respond and let's take it from there. Awesome. Excited to see. I feel like the answers will be so different across different stages of companies and where they are in their life cycle. Curious to see what people say. Let's give it a few more seconds. Revenue growth and pricing strategy, cost optimization and efficiency, cash flow and working capital management, investments in tech and automation, risk management and compliance. Those are the kind of levers, but let's see what the audience's top priority is. Awesome. Do we have results, team? Interesting. Okay. As expected,
Yeah.
half of them talk about revenue and pricing, revenue growth and pricing. Half of them talk about cost optimization and efficiency. And, maybe one person caring about cash flow and working capital management. Interesting. Fair enough. So I guess now that, we're talking about these different levers, Antonio, and, I'd love to kind of draw into your experience either at PVH or Google or Microsoft or GE as you kind of answer these questions. Like, uh, when is the right time to like start re-evaluating financial strategy? Because actually, before I ask that, for the year 2025, when should the financial strategy kind of be put in place? Is it sometime in 2024, mid, end? Like, when is the right time to kind of lock the strategy before we think of resetting it?
Yeah, I think for me, probably the most ideal time would be when you're building your before building your budget, actually, right? So that the conversation is not budget driven, but more like you have enough space to think about what the 3-year plan should be. And then once that high level conversation is done, then you build the budget, which is the first building block to get to where you want to be. So I would say ideally you want to do it before budget.
Hmm.
And back to my experience at GE, we actually had these operating cycles, which were obviously the operating plan, which was the equivalent of a budget, but also
Hmm.
we used to have this thing called session two, and session two was the blueprint of what is the strategy for the next 3 years, and it was an annual exercise because I think one misconception that I have seen is that people think that a strategy, once you set it, it's set in stone and then it doesn't change for a while. And I think
Hmm.
that it's quite the opposite, right? I think you should revisit your strategy every 6 months to see if you're actually going in the right direction or you need to adjust a few of the priorities.
Fair enough. I'm going to dig deeper there. You spoke about strategy and budget in themselves. Like, I think this is something that people confuse. Like, can you take maybe a real world example to talk about how strategy is different from the budget? Like, what goes into a budget and what would go into the financial strategy?
Yeah, so I think that the when I think about financial strategy, it's a broader discussion, right? So you need
Hmm.
to consider what do you actually know what the market looks like for you? And to give you examples, every time that I arrive in a new business, the first thing that I ask is, do we actually know the market where we operate? Are we the
Hmm.
top, are we the top supplier in that space? How much market share do we have out of the total market? How penetrated are my accounts?
Yeah.
Et cetera. So it's like a broader discussion of what's the share of wallet that I have with people, or if it's a B2B, share of wallet in that B2B space.
Yeah.
Um, I think when I started at tech, like Microsoft had that of when we started talking about multi-cloud,
Yeah.
how penetrated is, Deutsche Bank or Macy's or whoever using cloud providers. So is it more towards AWS, more Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud? And
Hmm.
depending on the answer of that question, then you will start, okay, if I want to gain 3 points of market share every year, what do I need to do? And then the big questions are, do I need to invest in product or in engineering or in a sales force, go to market? And I think once you have that vision, which again, it's more like back of the envelope type of numbers. It doesn't need to be like a full P&L model.
Hmm.
Once you have that defined, and I think that's a cross-functional exercise,
Yeah.
then you get into the budget. And I think the budget, that's where most people are familiar with it in finance. And it's
Yeah.
a year projection. And here you can go from being overly overkill, where
Yeah.
you get every single account of the P&L to the pennies,
Hmm.
or you do more, let's say level one, level two type of budgeting where you say, okay, sales this much by product, by region,
Hmm.
OpEx is a percentage of sales, my cost of goods sold is a percentage of sales, and then that's how you kind of budget. So it depends on the level, but a budget is more of a accountability scorecard, I would say, rather than a strategy.
Fair enough. And so you're saying the strategy is put in place before the budget because you don't want the budget to kind of influence the strategy. Uh, but
Yeah, I think that strategy shouldn't be constrained, right?
yeah,
It should be free, right? It should be free of the whatever target you have on EBIT for the year. It should be more about, okay, if we wanted to really double down and be market leaders, what needs to happen? And then from there, once you realize this is what I would need in a perfect world, you start knocking down, well, I don't have capital for this type of thing, but maybe
exactly.
I have this little capital for that. And then you start to ask or answer the question, how close can I get to perfect? Right.
Yeah. So
That's
let's
how,
take the example of, let's say, sorry to interrupt you. Let's take the example going back to Microsoft. You said, you know what, I want to increase my market share by 3%. I want to take some accounts from AWS or increase penetration in Macy's or Deutsche Bank. That's my goal. And, to get to that goal, I have different levers. I could invest in product. I could invest in more of a sales force. And that's kind of my strategy to hit that goal. And then I come to the budget, where in the budget, I look at, okay, how much capital do I have? Right? How do I allocate it? And what would my different accounts in the P&L look like eventually? Now, the strategy is more utopian. It's more ideal before it's when it's built out, and the budget kind of makes it more realistic. So how do you then kind of, when is the right time to reset the strategy? Do you need to reset it after the budget? Do you reset it every month, every 6 months? Because too much resetting can't be good, right? Because that kind of leaves no clarity on the path of execution.
yeah, I think in this strategy, there's always going to be things that will never change, right? Even if you
Yeah,
want to grow, and it goes back to the survey you just did. Most people, I think everybody will agree that we always have to be thinking about cost efficiency.
yeah,
So that's always going to be a part of the strategy. How do you grow, but uh, profitably, right?
yeah,
And so I would say there's things that you really don't need to change that much once you set it, but certain things for example, if you start breaking down the different aspects of running a business,
hmm,
one that I think you always need to reassess every quarter or every 6 months is anything that has to do with customer success or customer satisfaction.
yeah,
Pulsing from my retail experience now, right? Pulsing the customer with a simple button of like, how was your shopping experience today in our store?
yeah,
Because if that starts to trend yellow or red, then maybe I'm not doing something right. Maybe my staff is not trained enough in selling the product, or
hmm,
maybe the layout of the store is not, nice so that people are buying. In
hmm,
the software space, I think we used to have these like customer success CSAT scores, and
yeah,
we would try to like understand, okay, why is the customer not buying more, either, compute or whatever.
yeah.
But that customer feedback has to always be present, and you always have to question, should we be changing something on this? And because you have that customer feedback, it's pretty easy to figure out what's going wrong because it's direct from them. Like, this is not working for me, you're shipping too late, or I have invoicing problems and things like that. And kind of like if you go back to like the Jeff Bezos methodology, right? Like, as long as you're customer centric, it's a good way to reset the strategy. So I think that one's the one that I would revisit. Maybe cost efficiency not so much because it's more of a constant in any strategy.
So you're saying that based on customer feedback or triggers coming in from customer success, that is one trigger to reset financial
Yeah.
strategy. Is
Anything that is consistent, right? Like not just a one-off, but like if something is occurring consistently on a very repeated basis that you're like, huh, something is not clicking. And let's say something as dumb as you go to market with a product and then people are not buying it. Why?
Mm.
Right? Like, okay, is it that they don't like the material if it's a retail product,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't like the cut, the design? What is it, right? And that's when you start getting the feedback. If it's more
Yeah.
on the software side, right? Is it, is it laggy? Is it the user interface, or is it the back end? Like these questions, again, if it's a recurring theme with customers that they're complaining about it, then
Mm.
that's what you kind of need to shift.
Fair enough. And let's, maybe spend some time just talking a little bit about in companies of different. Actually, before I ask this question, I want to do a poll. And after the poll, I'm going to ask this question. So I'm going to get the team to bring up the second poll and then I'll ask my question. So for the audience. So who plays the most significant role in driving financial strategy changes in your organization? Is it the CFO, FP&A, CEO, board? Is it more cross-functional? Actually, there should be a sixth option here called other, but maybe somebody thinks there's none of these, then you feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll chat more about that as well. This is a good one. I want to see what people say. And I then want to ask you, Antonio, how this varies across companies and sectors, maybe drawing in from what you may have seen at Google or Microsoft or PVH or GE, like who is involved in what kind of decisions at what level would be helpful to understand.
Yeah.
All right, let's give it a few more seconds, see what the audience has to say. All right, I think we can end the poll. See some results. Okay, CFO 57%, cross-functional 21%, CEO 14%, board 0. Interesting. FP&A 7%. So more than half the audience says that in their organization is the CFO driving the financial strategy changes, followed by more cross-functional and then the CEO. Antonio, do you agree, disagree? How have you seen this play out at other organizations that you were a part of?
Yeah, I think it's the CFO, right? Probably FP&A as well, but CFO should be the one driving the strategy. Obviously there's broader strategy themes, right? Like a business strategy, and then you can have a marketing strategy, you can have a sales strategy, but the financial strategy of making sure that people hit the targets so that the shareholders are happy, right?
Yeah.
That's really up to the CFO to really drive that and push the accountability down the system.
Mm-hmm.
That operational leaders are focusing on the right metrics, right? So like if I want a certain amount of let's say EBITDA or whatever, then I need to make sure that all of the cost levers are
Mm.
appropriately uh accepted by these leaders of like, all right, I'm accountable for shipping X amount of product. I'm
Mm-hmm.
accountable for saving X amount of dollars in engineering and R&D, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Weekly or bi-weekly or monthly reviews, depends on the business, right? Is where you have these forums to discuss, okay, you guys are lagging behind. So what are we doing about it? Or we're on pace. Great. So I think it's really up to the CFO to design it and really drive the financial strategy. So I think I would agree with most of the audience here.
Yeah, so I'd actually love to maybe take more specific examples because I know the audience likes to hear some stories. So
Sure.
can you maybe talk about, like, bring that real, like I don't know, maybe without taking names of people, but like at companies, how have you seen the CFO kind of driving down, an important change, and how, especially with regard to changing the strategy. And I'm sure it would have involved, a bunch of stakeholders coming together, not everybody being on the same page. How are those discussions handled? And what role is the CFO really playing there?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I have examples where it went bad and examples where it went good, right? So I think in
I'd love to hear both if possible.
yeah. So I mean, in my GE days, I was
Yeah.
working in one of the industrial businesses, and we shifted the strategy from being customized products, so whatever customer specification the customer wanted,
Hmm.
we decided it was very expensive, right? Because you're basically designing a product like if it was a tailored suit for
Yeah.
each customer. So that would require many imagine the billable hours of engineers that would like design the
Yeah.
thing, manufacturing, making sure that even something as simple as a screw of the right size had to be made to order. And we decided, hey, this is too expensive, so we need to pivot to being more of a standardized type of product company. So we offer this type of product, and if you
Hmm.
like it, great. And this is the specifications that it has, and that's it. And the business actually didn't perform well with that strategy because we ended up spending a ton of money on designing and producing something standard,
Yeah.
but we didn't want to lose customers. We would always grant these exceptions or amendments to the contracts where we would like redesign it to fit the mold that the customer wanted.
Hmm.
And that just ended up with more, cost overruns and just a lot of fighting an uphill battle all the time. And we actually started to bleed cash at some point. Um, so that's an example where the business strategy, which obviously had good Excel spreadsheet numbers behind it, that if we move to customized engineering solutions, we would save dollars and we could kind of build scale.
Hmm.
And reality hit us in the face. And it turns out that that business, that industry is an industry that needs to be completely custom, design engineering products to fit specific customer needs. And I think that's where I was telling you, linking it back to that customer feedback thing. You always need to talk with your customers. Like why I always wonder, I don't know if at that point I was like a middle manager, like a senior FP&A manager. Did we ever talk with people, our customers, and saying, we're thinking of doing this. What would you guys think? And I don't know if we ever did that, but it
No,
didn't
but
work out.
I'd imagine in making a decision like this, like the CFO would not be making the decision in a silo. Like I'm sure the business teams were involved who were close to the customers because it's a cross-functional decision that's been made. Like how can it be made without consulting other people in the company who are actually in touch with the customers? I'm curious as to how.
No, so it was a cross-functional effort, right? So like I said, the CFO did the homework on the economics of changing the business model, and it worked.
Yeah.
Operators, people agreed because it's like, yep, this is going to reduce cycle times. It's going to reduce the number of inventory that I need to order, the amount of hours that my people are going to be working on the shop. I'm going to cut on warehouse logistics costs. So everything made sense, and I think it was signed off by everybody.
Hmm.
I think that back then I don't think it was a very new concept, this whole customer success,
Yeah.
customer satisfaction roles, right? And I don't think we had the formula of like what is it really that they wanted, because it's very different in a consumer product, right? You can just ask the consumer in a survey, but in a
Hmm.
B2B business that builds turbines to generate gigawatts, right? It's very different. Like who do you ask in EDF here or over there in like let's go like El Paso Electric, right, in the States? Who do you ask to give
Yeah.
feedback on turbine capacity? It's very hard. So again, I think they took an educated risk and it didn't work. And then we too late, but we started to unwind that. I think at this point in time, now it has been they unwinded the situation. It's actually very profitable again.
Yeah.
Uh, but it took many, many, many years, right, to fix that.
Fair. And before we dive into the next example where it actually went well, I want to take an audience question here, which is actually very relevant. So
Sure.
it's the question is from Chloe. She says, "Thanks, Antonio, for your input on being customer centric. How do you ensure alignment between finance, sales, product, and maybe even other teams to really become customer centric?" Because you're right, you need to be customer centric to set the right strategy, but different teams need to also come together. How do you ensure that alignment? And maybe if this was done well at the example you were about to give where it worked well, maybe you can take
Mm.
that example to answer this question if that helps.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I was told when I started my career is you need to walk the shop. Like you actually need to understand how the business works and operates, how
Mm,
they make money, right? And I always took that to heart, and I always demand of my teams, if you're gonna get hired here, you need to spend a lot of time with sales and operations people. And the reason is not that you understand the business, it ends there. I think that you need to understand it so that you dumb down the things you do in finance to a level
mm,
that a salesperson can understand it and operations people, right? Because I think we tend to go, I've done this myself, where, hey, your budget is this much and the conversion rate is this and the shipping rate and CAGR, and like you start talking all these terms and then you lose them completely. And they're like, I have no idea
yeah,
what you're talking. So when you start to build that skill of, okay, I know what your Excel spreadsheet and all your models and all that stuff, and you translate that into number of t-shirts that you need to sell, number of sneakers, or number of subscriptions, or how many new customers you need to acquire in a year, right?
yeah,
It helps to put something concrete, either a product, a head, right, that they can understand, or you need to cut X amount of dollars in your budget. And then
mm,
when dollars, it's super abstract. And then you start saying, look, you spend X amount of money last
yeah,
year on this type of material, right? And we ended up scrapping this much.
yeah,
So to save resources, you need to spend less on this type of thing. So it's more of a conversation that is really
mm,
human rather than Excel type of stuff, you know? I think that whenever you get to that point in your career that you can not master, but be decent with that skill, I think that alignment happens a lot faster.
mm. Fair enough. Can you maybe, again, I'm probing into examples, but can you maybe talk about a time where actually the different
Yeah.
stakeholders got together
Um,
to do this well? Like,
yeah, I think I give an example now, right? Building this year's budget and things like that. I feel like retail companies are very focused on channels, right? How much
yeah,
is brick and mortar? How much is e-commerce? How much is wholesale or retail or outlets?
mm-hmm,
And obviously it's important, right? Because you have operational leaders that deal with that. But I think that in my personal experience, I've seen here sometimes that I miss the product talk that you find in tech companies. Like the conversation is really about product, like how many Microsoft 365 licenses you need to sell, or how many turbines I need to sell. So it's very product centric budget, right? Like the product is king. And I want to bring that back. I want to be able to say, hey, you need to grow X amount this year, which means that you need to sell X amount of t-shirts and menswear and caps and footwear uh,
yeah,
per store, per day, per week, right? Things like that. And then you start dumbing it down to the level of on Black Friday, how much do you need to sell on Christmas, on summer, right? Like on these like discounting kind of seasons,
yeah,
and what type of volume you expect. So I think that doing that now has been helpful for me and
mm-hmm.
for the people that I work with to try and help them see a different angle of how to look at a business.
Yeah, I guess that also talks about how you can have, you know, people coming in from a very different industry, bring in a fresh perspective into another industry to kind of bring in, best practices from tech to the non-tech world. Switching gears, I know, time seems to be flying by. We're like 30 minutes in. I'll get the audience should, if you have questions, please feel free to keep posting on here and we'll take them at the end. I do have another poll right now, which I want to take as a segue into the next part of the discussion. So yeah, if we can have the team kind of bring the poll up, and we'll take it from there. How heavily does your company rely on automation and AI for financial planning? This is an interesting one. I want to see, how many are actually relying on automation and AI. Spreadsheets, some automation, actively investing in finance tech, and it's core to our finance strategy. And here, Antonio, I want to kind of hear from you on how this differs across tech and non-tech businesses. Like things should be different in, let's say, a Google or a Microsoft versus a PVS. So curious to hear a little bit more about that as well. But let's see what the audience has to say first. Let's give it like maybe 10 more seconds, and then we can 15 more seconds. All right, let's close the poll. Let's see what the audience has to say. 36% mostly on spreadsheets, as I would have guessed. 36% using some automation. 21% actively investing in finance tech, and 7% are saying that it's core. So majority are either still doing it on spreadsheets or using some automation, which I guess is not unexpected to me, but brings me to my question, like can tech actually help in any way at all here, or like will this just remain a non-tech driven process always? Curious to hear what you have to say on that, Antonio.
Yeah, I'm not surprised either. I was actually in an event on Tuesday this week, and then the same question was actually asked, and it was about more than 50% said we don't use AI at all.
Yeah,
People said a little bit of automation, and that's it. But I'm
yeah,
actually the one person that says that AI and automation are core, so that's pretty
yeah,
cool. I would say I haven't seen it that much outside of the Microsofts and Googles.
yeah.
Um, and there's, I guess there, so let me give you some context. So Microsoft, when I was there, we used a machine learning algorithm
Mm-hmm.
to forecast our sales, our revenue. And I think it did a beautiful job because it was based on, patterns and behaviors and whatnot. And it did reduce the time to forecast sales. And then whenever we got the model back, right, like because you run it in a matter of minutes, and then
Mm-hmm.
what was very nice about that is that you would just get a result, and then it was up to you to poke holes on it and then adjust it. And that's where like I think you cut the time of data prepping and analysis to just go straight to the source, which is the business partner, and have a conversation like, hey, what do you think? Do you think you can make this much on recurring revenue on your existing subscriptions, or do you think you can renew this contract with the customer for next year with additional license, like go from E3 to E5 when we talk about M365, or that type of conversation was very nice, and you just like cut the time to prepare things in like I don't know, like 100%. Like, it was crazy how much time we saved. Then at Google, I we also used it, but I think at Google, uh, it went a little deeper because it was more the expectation of like you need to learn how to use SQL, and then that was kind of like your tech stack, and then you would like connect with things. Um, we even had courses on like Python and stuff like that. But again, I don't know if I would tell you that an FP&A person needs to learn Python, I don't think I would go that far. And then on the industrial side, I never used it when I was back at GE, and here at PVH, we don't have it either. So I think it's mostly Excel that you rely on Excel. The one thing we did use at GE a little bit was the robotic process automation. So this company called UiPath, and
Yeah.
that was helpful. So I think there's like different levels of stack, but to 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 be fair or to be honest with you, like I don't think AI has a use right now, a very clear use, even if it's very predominant. I think it's very hard. Like we don't have an enterprise license yet for you to upload your data, confidential data, into an LLM so that it can run the models.
Hmm.
Closest thing that I've seen that I personally use now because I push for it is that I actually asked access for Copilot on
Yeah.
M5, and then I use it to like, all right, give me a Monte Carlo simulation of daily sales based on X and Y, Z, and it works, but it's not. I wouldn't say that it has changed my life just yet.
But I'm curious, you said you were using robotic process automation. What was that being used for?
So that was more to automate like very manual tasks, like AP type of things, and
Hmm?
anything that has to do like with the like sales to cash process, for example. Whenever we had an army of people that were doing, basically tying invoices numbers to payments and things like that.
Yeah.
And I remember we got this supplier, and they helped us map out all these like flows with the robots,
Yeah.
and it did help.
Okay, but that's really like more, day-to-day process automation. It's not
Yeah.
really affecting your financial strategy as such.
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, you can say it affects it a bit because think about it. One thing we did see is that we were spending headcount money, right? So if you think about the capital allocation piece of the strategy, you're spending money on people that are reconciling invoices to payments and things like that, very manual, menial work.
Yeah.
The fact that we were able to replace that headcount cost with software
Fair
that
enough.
liberated capital that you could invest somewhere else.
Fair enough. Makes sense. And so I mean, unsurprisingly, you were saying that maybe more tech-first companies have some element of maybe forecasting or predicting what my sales will look like, what my growth will look like, what product might sell. But beyond that, the strategy is kind of still being baked in just on spreadsheets.
Yeah, I think one key differentiator
Mm-hmm.
on how much more or how much less you can use AI is if you are you can say like a dinosaur, right? Like a company like GE or SAP, like those very, 100-year plus company that has
Mm-hmm.
too many ERPs and too many processes that are manual.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder to transform than a startup that is a digital native that already has workspace working and they work with buyers like in France. There's a very famous startup that works with FP&A modeling and has AI capabilities. It's called Pigment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot easier if you're already in the cloud and your data is already there, usable. You have the right engineering uh, muscle, some savvy FP&A analysts that know how to use that type of tool a lot
Mm-hmm.
faster to deploy, right? But if you're talking about a dinosaur, where first, like I think you need to reduce the number of ERPs, and then you get
Yeah.
visualization, right? So like it's a much, much longer journey for the big companies in the Fortune 500.
On that note, you spoke about pigment. Are there any tools you've seen that you would recommend for budgeting, forecasting, scenario modeling that you've actually seen add value?
Um, no, not really. I mean, I know that one because they're a supplier we work with. Not this actually not on FP&A, but we worked on supply chain, and I know that we're very happy. Um, I don't know honestly any other that I could tell you like they're great, but I think UiPath is great too, to be honest, for automating things. But other than those two, not sure. I'm sure there's a ton of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know a bunch, but I'm just seeing if you work with any or have any good kind of recommendation. But I want to take a couple of questions from the audience at this point. So
Sure.
I see Stephen has a, more macro question. So given the economic uncertainty, how do you approach risk management in financial planning?
Yeah, no, great question. So like I said, I think that one thing I do every time that I'm in a role is I always try to connect with these business development, business strategy teams or
Mm-hmm.
the marketing team to understand the market, right? So and the market is not just the sizing of the market, but what's going on. Simple
Mm-hmm.
example. I work in retail now. If President Trump decided to increase tariffs on the European Union on textile, I
Yeah.
know for the fact that my costs are just going to go up, right? And I'm pretty sure that a lot of CFOs right now are just going bananas with the tariff story.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you think about the framework of financial strategy, which is like market understanding, financial projections, sales go-to-market strategy, operational effectiveness strategy, like if you go down that line, the last thing you would put is, or like not the last thing, but like a circle surrounding all of that would be what are the risks that will prevent you from reaching that target, that strategy, and what are the contingency plans? So for example, in this tariff thing, right? Like that's a big one. So what do you do there? And how much would that stop you from doing business? And then now, if you play with that scenario, is your strategy changing from being growth focused or acquisitive to more of a let's just sustain and keep the market share that we have, right? So
Yeah.
it's a big shift depending just because of one simple thing that might change. Um, so I think you
I
need to
think, sorry,
play
I'm
with,
going to interrupt you there, but the example we were discussing yesterday was like, suddenly out of the blue, you have DeepSeek, and now I'm wondering what.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
exactly. And then today, actually, funny you mentioned this because it was the DeepSeek, copied ChatGPT or whatever, and it's better. And then today I saw in the news it was, I think, a TechCrunch article that apparently some researchers in Stanford recreated DeepSeek for $50. So I'm like, yeah, it's an ever-changing environment all the time.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. I think we're almost running out of time. Maybe we have time to squeeze in a couple of questions. So Sharon is asking, how do you assess whether a new finance tool is actually worth the investment?
That's a good question. I think so. If you have the opportunity to use it as a free trial, I
Mm-hmm.
would use it. I also would say if there's flexibility in the
Mm-hmm.
budget for discretionary spending,
Yeah.
you can. I've done it myself. You can call the company and say, "Hey, we'd like to try you out with a few licenses. If we're talking about software, right? What can you offer? Like, what type of deal can you offer?" And sometimes most companies, when they're trying to push their product, they will be like, "All right, cool, we'll give you some discount or training or something." And then you just test it if it works or not. I think that obviously try to start small with the tools because if we're thinking about like again back to my point of Pigment. Pigment is like an actual full FP&A suite, right? Or Workday, for example. Workday has most people know Workday out of the HR type of solutions that they offer, but they also have FP&A stuff, and most people don't know. So you can try and test it out with a few users, but I don't know. Again, you need to figure out the data integration and things like that.
Mm.
But I think it's worth it to have those conversations every once a quarter with one supplier. They're like, okay, what do you offer? How fast can you turn this
Yeah.
process nimbler, right? Because otherwise you just keep the status quo and you're not never changing. And I think back to driving the financial strategy, another thing that I can tell you from experience is the big differentiator of Microsoft and why their finance team is so world class is that the CFO, Amy Hood, actually made a commitment to invest a lot of capital in revamping the financial infrastructure and architecture. So like simplifying the ARPs, getting rid of the complexity, reskilling or upskilling the people. So it was
Mhm.
really like a real big commitment to transform the finance company, the finance culture of the company. And I've seen other businesses where they don't care. They're like, well, no, it's an extra expense. I rather hire people that are going to maintain the spreadsheets, and that's it. Like if it's not broken, why do I fix it? So I think that I'm more towards this side of the house where try things and commit capital to it because it's important to make good decisions, good level of data, analysis, visualizations, things like that. I think those every once a quarter I would talk to a supplier to figure out what's out there.
Just, shameless plug. Zenskar does offer a free trial in case, people want to try it out before they make a
Yeah,
purchase.
there you go. Perfect segue.
Awesome. I guess we have time for maybe one or I guess
Sure.
two more questions, depending on how long the first one takes. So,
Yep.
uh, let's see. How do you approach workforce planning from a financial strategy perspective?
Workflow planning,
Workforce, like
workforce.
is people planning.
Ah, yeah. So again, it depends on the business you're working with. I can tell you if it's the one that I have freshest in my mind. So at Google, I was on the consulting house of Google Cloud, and that was it was basically like McKinsey, right? So you plan based on the number of people you have and how
Mm-hmm.
many billable hours you have available in a day, in a week.
Yeah.
And then you do the projections of like, all right, how much do I need to make? I think a service business is so beautiful because you can actually see the relationship, direct relationship between the amount of revenue you bill and the
Yeah.
amount of hours you're working, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that is so cool because it just helps you understand really, are you efficient, right? Like are people being utilized fully?
Yeah.
And and is the business declining? So I think that business, to give you an example, that's probably the easiest one to plan. Like a service business is very easy to plan because it's just billable hours,
Yeah.
uh, time utilization, all that stuff, right? I think on a more complex business, like on an industrial, or sorry, like on a more tech business, like software. I don't know what the profile is of the audience, but if it's on software, we used to be more on uh, how many salespeople do we need to sell this product? And because software is a little bit more, it depends on what type of software, but it's longer cycle time. You might actually need one key account manager that spends 3 years with one customer to sell a multi-billion-dollar deal, right? So there it's a little blurrier how to plan it. And then if it's on an industrial, that I think it's also a little easier.
Mhm.
It's about, the number of people that you need in the shop. Like do you know, are you close to the shop enough to know what is the lead time that they spent on the amount of defects, right? Again, back to utilization. So I think workforce is all about optimizing the size of the headcount for the number of revenue that you get. And I think that the easiest way to test that is the productivity, revenue per employee or profit per employee. Like
Yeah.
how much money is each employee bringing to the table? I think that's the best way to measure if at least on the sales side,
Yeah.
you're and then on the manufacturing side, I think that you can test that with the amount of output that they're producing in the factory based on how many hours is the factory open,
Yeah.
um, amount of extra hours and things like that. So I would say use productivity measures to figure out if your workforce is being productive. That's the that's the way I do it.
Yeah, I guess it depends a little bit on the, sector as well, but
Yeah.
as you mentioned, it's very different in a services business. Most of the audience here is, of course, from the technology world, but yeah, I think a metric we track internally, of course, as well as, just like revenue per FTE. So makes sense. I'm going to leave it up for one last question.
Sure.
Uh, VP of Finance at a mid-sized company. Any tips on handling team? This is interesting. Any tips on handling team resistance when rolling out financial strategy changes?
Very, very good question. I think it's common. I think there's always going to be someone, there's always going to be a cynic in the team,
Yeah,
or sometimes more than one, right?
yeah,
And the way that I approach it, and I'm assuming that, let's say that you've done everything to explain it. You've done the CEO type of angle speech, you've done your CFO speech, like you've exhausted any logical type of explanation to tell this person this is why this makes sense, and the person still doesn't buy it. I think that what has worked for me in those cases is that you can just tell them, okay, even if we're wrong, we're
yeah,
trying we're trying something, okay?
yeah,
And we might miss it completely, but even if we miss it completely, right? We'll learn something to the point that
yeah,
whatever we might learn might kill the business, and then you're going to be out the door anyways, and you're going to look for a new job. Or if the capital is still there to sustain the business,
yeah,
we'll pivot, right? But I think that these people, sometimes when they're in your team, you just need to help them to understand this is something that we need to do because collectively we haven't figured out a better way.
yeah.
And it's better to always do something that's kind of okay, but you're acting, you're moving fast,
Mm,
than just, stay with your arms crossed and until the lightning of inspiration of the perfect idea hits you. So that's what I would do. I would try to like just focus them like, look, I get it. You might disagree with the thing. I get it, but we need to commit now and move. And if this fails, I'll be the first one to acknowledge that, you know what, you were right. It was wrong, but give me a better idea then, and challenge them to give you a better idea. Uh,
yeah,
because that's where you'll see that most of the cynics that criticize the strategy, they don't have an idea of how to fix the strategy. They just think that it's a crappy idea, but they don't have an alternative. So
yeah,
test the waters there, but obviously start first with trying to be logical and explain it so they get it. But then
yeah,
it gets to that point of complication, then just say, hey, we're trying stuff here and we want to move. Disagree and commit, right?
yeah. Got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So, well, I really enjoyed this chat, Antonio. I mean, I do a few of
Likewise.
these webinars, but like this one really kind of, thanks to the candid stories you shared, honestly, that, I think it brought a lot of color. So appreciate your time. And, I'm sure the audience also enjoyed it as well. Seems like, there's a bunch of questions we couldn't take. I apologize for that to the audience, but we're out of time.
And
But yeah,
if you guys have questions that I couldn't answer, like send them over and I'll maybe send you like in a Word doc the answers and you can distribute it to people. I don't mind doing that
Antonio,
as
is
well.
it okay if we share with just the audience here your email ID?
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, and the audience can write to you, and we'll do that. Awesome.
Sounds good.
Great. Well, thanks a lot to the audience and to Antonio for yet another enlightening webinar with Zanskar, and looking forward to seeing you on the next edition in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye.